Welcome to our class, DJS 2106, Conflict Resolution and Peace Science. Today we focus on meanings and theories of change for peace. My name is Mr. Waso. Welcome. We shall try to divide the lesson into 5 areas. First, we shall look at the definitions of peace with reference to Johann Galtung, and then Adams and Albert Einstein. And then we shall look at meanings of peace with reference to Johann Galtung. And then we shall look at the violence triangle according to Johann Galtung, because he actually used the violence triangle to come up with the meanings of peace. And then we shall look at the characteristics of positive peace by Johann Galtung. And then finally, we shall quickly look at the theories of change for peace building by Jeanne and Mark Rogers. So to begin with, we just quickly have a look at the definitions of peace. And peace, as defined by Galtung, is the absence of physical and structural violence, or if you wish, systemic and institutional violence. So that peace is not only the absence of violence, but also the presence of structural, systemic, and institutional peace. Yeah. And then, according to Albert Einstein, peace is not merely the absence of war, but the presence of justice, of law, and of order. So you can see that there is a similarity between these two definitions. That when we are building peace, we are trying first of all to do away with physical violence so we can stop people from fighting. But beyond that then we engage into reforms so that we can be able to change structures, we can be able to provide justice, and we can also be able to maintain law and order, including democracy and even economic growth and the others. And then Adams is more or less in line with the first two when she discusses what peace is. And she says true peace, and by true peace she's discussing positive peace, is not merely the absence of war, it is the presence of justice. And in this case, she's actually discussing not just criminal justice, but social justice, which is the most important justice, so that resources, people are not fighting, one, that's okay, but number two, that resources can be distributed equitably, so that as many people as possible can be able to have their basic needs without a struggle. So trying to build that middle class. Yeah. Then Johann Galtung gives us the 3 meanings of peace, which are very important because most scholars will refer to these meanings of peace, because this is more or less where the study of peace actually begins. We need to understand what it is. So he moves peace from an individual towards the group, because being a religious person, he believes that if you do not have peace within yourself, you cannot be able to have peace with the others. So interpersonal peace begins with personal peace. So he discusses peace as stability and tranquility, which means we need to have law and order. Just apart from having peace within yourself, there needs to be law and order, so that at the end of the day, you are internally peaceful, but the environment within which you are living is also showing some order and tranquility and serenity. This is what St. Augustine calls the tranquillitas ordinis, the tranquility of good order, yeah, in Latin. So basically, inner peace, law and order. And then the second one is what is experienced in most communities, especially here in Africa, what he calls negative peace. The absence of organized collective violence. So it is possible that in some countries, people are not fighting the way they are fighting in countries like Somalia or DRC Congo or Sudan, but the structures are violent. Yeah? When you look at the systems, the institutions, and the structures within that country, you find out that they are not fair. The way they are distributing resources, they are doing it with some sort of discrimination and marginalizing as well as oppressing some groups. So this is the kind of peace that in Latin we call pax, the absence of war, but which does not necessarily mean that the systems and the institutions and the culture is correct, so that then the violence is within those institutions. And then positive peace is the most important one now here, because Galtung believes that we need to move to this type of peace as human beings, so that we are at peace with ourselves, there's serenity and tranquility, there's law and order maintained, yes, but that we are not fighting amongst each other, fine, but that ultimately our structures and our systems and our institutions are also fair. Our attitudes towards each other are actually fair. Yeah? And this is the kind of peace that we call shalom. So when you hear in most religious gatherings, you hear people say shalom, brothers and sisters. They are meaning this kind of peace that we mean the positive peace, which he calls the ideal peace, what we are expected to move to say that we have actually grown as a country and we are embracing the highest level of peace. So then moving forward, then we can discuss the Galtung's violence triangle. And then quickly, you can see the triangle that he came up with, so that he discussed the visible and the invisible violence. And the visible violence is the violence that we see with our eyes, which includes direct violence. People are fighting. So when we are working on negative peace, we are basically referring to the absence of direct, organized, collective violence. But when we are discussing positive peace, we are discussing the getting rid of cultural violence and structural violence, which is always invisible. So most people like to settle for this. And so long as they've gotten rid of direct violence, they don't care to get into the cultures and structures and try to make sure that then they can address this type of violence as well to end up with what we call now positive peace. So then moving forward from his meanings of peace and from his different types of violence, now he came to discuss the kinds of qualities that actually define what he calls positive peace. And one such a quality is cooperation. That in a society where there is positive peace, there is cooperation, there is teamwork. Different communities, different sectors of the community are working together for the common good, as opposed to some sectors of the community or the society embarking into engagements that only benefit them and do not benefit the rest of the groups within the society. So there is cooperation. In a country like Kenya, for instance, we need to see different tribes uniting and working together and cooperating on certain projects that promote the common good, that benefit all, as opposed to each group working on their own thing and competing with each other. So that is cooperation, unity, uniting on projects. Freedom from fear is about security. So that in a country where there is positive peace, there needs to be security. In most countries, this is a function of the central government. The government has to ensure that the people are protected. In most countries, even after war, it's the government that compensates the people. It doesn't matter who was killing who. It means that the country failed to protect the people. So the people need to experience the freedom from fear. So they need to feel secure. Then there's the freedom from want. That is about basic needs. The country has to ensure that the basic needs of the people are provided, and that as many people as possible are able to access those basic needs within that country. So it involves capacity building, so that then you build up on the purchasing capacity, the purchasing power of the people, so that people are able to access the basic needs, especially food, water, healthcare, housing, and the rest. Economic growth and development. The country needs to grow economically, not the kind of growth that makes the richer richer and the poor poorer, but the kind of growth that expands the middle class, so that at least you can have 3 tribes as opposed to 2 tribes, the rich and the poor. You can also have one big tribe in between, so that the rich are very few, the poor are very few, but the middle class are now the majority. But then also economic development includes, but development also includes the growth of infrastructure and other social services within the country. That is a quality of positive peace. The absence of exploitation focuses on the value of human labor within a country, so that people are being paid enough for the work that they do, as opposed to people being exploited or actually being enslaved, so that people are working for too little. An example could be when you move to a city like Nairobi, and you look at the industrial area, and you look at communities that live in places like Kibera and say Kawangware. They have to walk every morning, the industrial area. Why? Because they cannot even afford to pay their fare to and from work. But when they go there, they are working for those industries, they come up with products and they sell them at a very good amount, so they get the profit and they do not take care of the workers. So the absence of exploitation is all about fair wages for the workers. Equality. Equality in dignity, first of all, so that in dignity we are equal, but also equality in terms of making sure that resources are distributed equitably, so that each can get according to what they need, so that some people are not getting more. So there are equal opportunities as well. It's not just about resources. There is equal access to resources, and there are equal opportunities for work and the like. Justice is about criminal justice, that in a community that has positive peace, when people commit crimes, they are held criminally accountable for the crimes that they commit, and that before the law, we are equal, so that justice is not done for some and for others. There is no justice completely. So this is about criminal justice, but we could also refer to social justice, but social justice could also be linked to the equality, so that then resources can also be distributed equitably. And then freedom from freedom of action, simply freedom to worship, freedom of movement, expression, freedom to marry, to enter unions and get out of them, so that then at the end of the day, the government is not controlling everything that we do. We have some liberty to be able to do our things. Unlike traditionally, especially in absolute monarchs, where the government owned the land, you only plant it wherever you plant it, the government would come and harvest for you. The government would tell you who to marry, which religion to belong to, when to talk or not to talk, okay? So in a community where there's positive peace, there is actually the freedom of action. So that then our action is only limited when we break the law. But when we do not break the law, there's that room where we can be able to act freely. And then pluralism is the whole idea of the promotion of diversity, so that ultimately we can promote different religions, we can promote different political ideologies, we can promote different ways of thinking and expression and arts and different cultures, so that then there is no conformity. There was a time when the government would wake up and they tell you, this is the state religion. If you are not belonging to this religion, you do not belong to this country. So that we create that environment of tolerance, and plurality, so that people can be able to get involved in different aspects as opposed to limiting them to only one. And then dynamism is about the country or the society evolving, so that 10 years down the road, you are not in the same place that you were. Yeah? A good example could be, you look at the era of technological advancement. So it's expected that when you move to a country like Kenya today and you go to institutions, that this traditional filing of documents has gone away, that people are doing soft filing on their computers as opposed to putting things in files and stamping, and then later on the files get lost and we are not able to get them. So that as technology advances, so the country needs also to follow suit so that it can also advance. That countries have to build their infrastructure as opposed to back in 10 years ago, 20 years ago, in certain countries, we only had rough roads, and 20 years down the road, there's no more tarmacked roads in those countries. It means that that society is not being dynamic, and it's not being open to change. Yeah? And that is not a good sign, that it's a sign of stagnation, and it doesn't promote positive peace. And then he goes ahead also to say that aspects such as human rights and other values, including national anthems and national speeches, especially the kinds of speeches that presidents give when they are being sworn in, that they also entail some key aspects that can also be incorporated into these 10 aspects. And then finally, we look at the theories of change for peace building. So we've discussed what peace is, but now what we want to discuss is how do we get there. And Jeanne and Mark, they discuss different aspects of how we can be able to build peace. And one of those aspects is the individual change theory, that peace comes through transformative change of a critical mass of individuals. So you are changing their consciousness, their attitudes, their behaviors, and their skills. So that then later on, when an individual changes and they are inclined towards relating with others and seeing others positively, then there's a high likelihood that then you can be able to build peace. So you begin with an individual. So the methods could include investment in the individual change through trainings, personal transformation and conscious raising workshops, or dialogues and encounter groups, trauma healing. You're able to change individuals so they can change their mindset about the other group that is different from them. And then the healthy relationships and connections theory, which actually focuses on the whole idea that you need to build relationships and networks. A good example is here in Kenya. The Building Bridges initiative is intended to help build healthy relationships and connections. So peace emerges out of a process of breaking down isolation, polarization, and division, and prejudice, and stereotypes, so that then people can learn to relate with each other. So you can engage into programs and campaigns that help people see these differences and demystify some of these prejudices that they have towards each other. So we could do intergroup dialogue, networking, relationship building, and processes. All those are intended to help us build healthy relationships and connections. The withdrawal of resources for war theory is based on the fact that actually for people to engage into a conflict or a sustained war, they need resources, both human, material, and sometimes economic, and mostly economic resources. So there must be people supplying them with weapons. There must be money funding their budgets, and there must be the human personnel willing to join the war and fight. And sometimes, especially when you think of countries like Somalia, where the Somali people in diaspora send in money to promote some of these groups like Al-Shabaab, so that for you to be able then to end up such conflicts, so that we can build peace, we need to withdraw or to control or to cut those resources towards the war. And then There's now the reduction of violence as another theory that can help us build peace. So peace will result as we reduce the levels of violence perpetrated by combatants and their representatives, because there are people who believe that you can actually build peace while the war is ongoing. But this theory goes to tell us that we need to reduce the violence. We need actually a ceasefire, so that then we can end the violence, the direct violence, so that the fighting has ended. Then maybe we can work on a peace agreement, and after working on a peace agreement, then maybe later on we can engage in institutional reforms. But the war has to end. Yeah? So people cannot say, oh, we cannot end the war unless there is justice. Sometimes we just need to end the war first. Then when the war has ended, when we are not killing each other, then now we can get room to address matters peace building. So peace building is not possible when the war is ongoing. The root causes and justice theory actually focuses on the whole idea that sometimes when we're trying to resolve a conflict, we focus on the consequences and then we forget the root causes. So which means our solution is going to be short-term and not long-term. So this theory is intended to help us focus on the root causes of a conflict, especially if we are using that tool that I called the conflict tree, because then that tool helps us to look at the root causes of a conflict. Because then when we address the root causes of a conflict, then we are preventing that conflict and we are reducing the likelihood that that conflict will come again. So, and the justice theory simply goes to say that we need to look at the systems and the institutions and the culture, and especially the systems, and find out how unfair are the systems. Because if the systems are unfair, then you cannot have social justice. So we need to address the systems to make them even more fair, so that then we can be able, moving forward, be able to help reduce these conflicts from recurring. So some of the methods we could engage in to help address this particular theory is that the long-term campaigns for social and structural change, truth and reconciliation, changes in social institutions, changes in laws, regulations, and economic systems. A good example is here in Kenya, when we first of all changed our constitutions and at least tried to reform as many institutions as possible after the 07-08 post-election violence. And then now we focus on the institutional development theory, which is linked to the root causes theory, but now here we need to identify first which institutions are not fair and why are they not fair, so that then we can get into those institutions and try to change them and reform them so that they can be in line with justice and fairness. And by doing that, then we are able to actually prevent that conflict from happening again, because most conflicts are a result of institutional failure. So some things that we could do to achieve that is by coming up with new constitutional and governance arrangements and entities, development of human rights, the development of the rule of law, anti-corruption, establishment of democratic and equitable economic structures, economic development, and democratization generally. Then there's the political elites theory. This theory of peace building helps explain that the political elites sometimes they can cause a conflict and even sustain it. And so that for us to be able to build peace, it needs to begin from the top going down. So we need to put pressure on the political elites so that then they can also feel the heat of the war and they can start championing for peace. And once it begins from the top coming down, it even becomes easier for us to get to peace, to lasting peace. If we can change the attitudes of the political elites, and then they can also see that when there's conflict, they also suffer. Because sometimes there's conflict, the people on the grassroots suffer, the political elites do not suffer. So this one intends to promote the building of peace that goes from top down. And the next one is more or less the opposite of that one, the grassroots mobilization theory, where you have now to build peace from the bottom up. Examples could be the kinds of things that happened in India when Mahatma Gandhi was organizing the people to fight for non-violently for peace against the British colonialism. But also we could refer to like Martin Luther King and the way that they organized during the civil rights movements in the 1960s in the US, and so that they could achieve the rights of the black people to be able to vote. So basically that is when we use the grassroots so that people from below can demand for peace, and they can demonstrate, and they can do all sorts of things to help make sure that there is peace. So the methods could include mobilizing the grassroots groups to either oppose war or to advocate for positive action, nonviolent direct action campaigns like Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King, use of the media. The media could be used positively actually to help the grassroots mobilize, education, mobilization efforts, etc., advocacy groups. And then the economic theory is about the whole idea that in some societies, the economic policies and structures are built to support war, such that even when you look at things like the budget of a country for a fiscal year, a lot of money is given to the military, and the country uses a lot of money to buy weapons, and there are so many things, and in some countries they also have an economy that relies on the manufacturing of these weapons and selling them to other parts of the country. So that then those aspects, they need to be looked at. And there have been some scholars who have looked at some countries where the toys that children use are also warlike toys, and that they sell more than the non-violent toys. So the economy cannot be built around promoting war, so that we need to fight that type of an economy. So methods could be use of government financial institutions to change the supply and demand dynamics for especially weapons, and then control incentive and reward systems and boycotts of just certain goods that we know when we buy them we are just promoting war. And then the public attitudes theory is about a group now, so that then we focus on an entire society and their public attitudes towards each other. So war and violence are partly motivated by prejudice, misperceptions, and intolerance of difference. We can promote peace by using the media, television and radio to change public attitudes and build greater tolerance in society. So that then methods could include TV and radio programs that promote tolerance, modeling tolerant behavior. So basically to be able to change the attitudes of the people so they can learn to live with each other, tolerate each other a little bit more, allow for pluralism within the society. Yeah? And then finally, just another way of looking at how we can build peace within the society, because there are different perspectives. Then we could look at things like law, advocacy and solidarity, restorative justice, so that if there has been a conflict, we try to restore people back to where they were before the conflict came. Transitional justice, especially if there were large-scale atrocities against human rights, we try to transition the community to normalcy. And then trauma healing, humanitarian action, government and multilateral efforts, justice and healing, structural and institutional change, violence and prevention, conflict response and transformation, education, development, dialogue. So they are all other sorts from different perspectives. There are all other sorts that, of mechanisms that we can use to be able to actually build lasting peace in the society that is locally sustained, and that we can also use to prevent conflicts from happening again, so that we are not continuing to build a cycle of violence in the society. And that brings us to the end of our class. Thank you so much.
These televised lectures supplement our robust online learning going on our MKU online platform. You can view more on our televised lectures via our online platform. We are in a digital era, and Mount Kenya University knows this. The following are the steps to follow so as to complete your online application. Download the application form from the website www.mku.ac.ke. Attach copies of your academic certificates and ID. Pay the application fees via M-Pesa pay bill number 270988. Your ID is the account number. 2,000 shillings is the charge for a postgraduate. You can also deposit in the bank accounts provided on the website. Then, email all the above to apply@mku.ac.ke.